Welcome everyone. It's truly a pleasure to invite the panelists this afternoon, Sarayu, Natarajan, Rahul Verma, Gilles Verniers. They're here to discuss different aspects of the elections that are underway in the country. You might remember the colloquium in the past has hosted panel discussions on the eve of important state assembly elections. We had one before the Rajasthan elections, one before the West Bengal elections, and one before the Karnataka elections. So it was impossible not to have a discussion when the general elections are underway. And we are truly fortunate in having three superb scholars with us who have been very generous in accepting the invite at short notice. Thank you all. Just a quick two-line introduction to each one of them. Sarayu Natarajan is the founder of Apti Institute that does research on how technology interfaces with society with an equity-centered perspective. She holds a degree in law from the law school. Her PhD work from King's College was based on fieldwork in Bangalore, where she looked at migrants and how political parties were mobilizing them. Rahul Verma is a fellow at the Center for Policy Research in New Delhi. He's almost done with his PhD at the University of California, Berkeley. He's doing it with Pradeep Chibbar, with whom he has co-edited a book called Ideology and Identity, The Changing Party Systems of India. Gilles Verniers is faculty in political science at Ashoka University. He is also co-director of the Trivedi Center for Public Political Data. His PhD work, I remember clearly when he came here during his fieldwork time, was in the Samajwadi Party politics in Uttar Pradesh, but his interests more broadly are on the issues of democracy and representation in the country. He is co-editing a book on the sociology of elected representatives in India with Christophe Jaffrelot and Sanjay Kumar. So we've decided to have a sequence to the panel which is other than the one you saw in the email that was sent out. So Gilles will speak first, and then Sarayu, and then Rahul. Each one of them has 20 to 25 minutes. It's a leisurely panel time, so we'll have an hour left for discussion afterwards. So, Gilles. The mic there should work.
All right, good afternoon, and well, I'm extremely grateful to be here, Chandan. Thank you for the invitation. I've visited Bangalore many times. This is as further south as I've ever been. This is the first time I'm actually visiting APU, so it was a long overdue visit, so I'm glad I can do this and in this particular set of circumstances. So as the title of the presentation suggests, I will speak about the BJP, and I will speak about the BJP's prospect in the Hindi belt and a little bit beyond, because obviously you need to look at the larger picture. The structure that I'm going to follow is actually quite simple, straightforward, and I'll try to show you a little bit of data, hopefully not as a substitute for arguments and reflections, but as just a starting point for further conversation. So what I want to do first is to go back a little bit on the performance of the BJP in 2014. We remember well how out of the ordinary that performance was, and it's important to go back to some of the numbers associated with that victory to realize how unusual the BJP sweep in the Hindi belt was. Then I'm going to look at the performance of the BJP in subsequent state elections in all those Hindi belt states. The main argument is going to be that there was some sort of a myth of invincibility, or a narrative at any rate of invincibility, that was built around the BJP, not only after 2014, but also after the 2017 elections in Uttar Pradesh, which they also swept. But if you look at the overall results over a longer period of time, over a period of 5 years, you see that there's more contrast to the performance, the trajectory of the BJP in those regions than one would sometimes expect. And then I will basically look at three types of factors that are expected to have a limiting or an adversarial impact on the BJP, looking at alliances, looking at the Congress itself, although I will let Rahul speak in greater detail about the Congress party. And I will also look at some of the sociological phenomenon. Thank you very much. And I have a pen, thank you. And I will look at some of the sociological phenomena that have accompanied the rise of the BJP and see how these may or may not play out across the Hindi belt. So let me start here by basically reminding you that a large reason why the BJP won a majority on its own is because of its extraordinary performance in the Hindi belt. We all have in mind the fact that they got a majority of seats with 31% of vote share. In many ways, this has been a misrepresentation of the performance because that 31% is calculated on the basis of all the seats and the BJP did not contest in every seat. And so if you look at the performance of the BJP in seats where it contested across India, the performance was not 31%, it was 39%, which is a very different kind of result. The more you climb in vote share, the harder it gets to basically attract new voters, different kinds of voters, broader forms of social coalitions, different narratives needed. So grabbing these 2, 3, 4, 5 additional voters, percentage of voters above 35%, above 30% is actually very difficult to do. And if you look at the average vote share of the BJP in the Hindi belt, you go up to 46.5%, right? So absolutely undisputable sweep. Anyone who contested against the BJP finished a distant second, and everyone else was completely dwarfed in those elections. Right? The strike rate or the conversion of seats contested into seats won was above 90% in 7 of the 10 states and not 20, sorry for that, which means that they basically won 90% of the seats in most of the Hindi belt states. You have the detail here. 190 seats alone came from those 10 Hindi belt states, and obviously to repeat a performance like what they got in 2014, they would have to, in a way, sort of match the same kind of performance that they did in 2014. And to my mind, and I'm not alone in saying that, it is extremely unlikely that they will succeed in doing that, right? So if you look at the performance of the BJP in the same states after, and if you put those state elections into a timeline, you see that the closer you are from 2014, the higher the performance. And in fact, the elections that followed immediately the last general election in Haryana and in Jharkhand, the BJP even improved its vote share and again swept those states in terms of seats. But barely a year after, the BJP starts already facing a number of setbacks in important states, like Bihar, where confronted or challenged by an alliance of opposition parties, it could not, perform the way it had anticipated. It could not perform the way it had performed in the previous election, the general elections, where that alliance configuration wasn't there. And not only the alliance prevented the BJP from winning, but they also lost a little bit of vote share. Delhi, of course, was a particular election. There was the eruption of Aam Aadmi Party just a few years before, a fairly curious succession of events leading to repeated elections in Delhi, and AAP did very well, owing to the complete collapse of the Congress party and a strong transfer of votes from Congress to AAP. in Delhi. Then you go to 2017, which need a little bit of explanation. So you see that the BJP, by and large, maintained its performance, right? And again, sweep that state. And that victory, I would argue, played a major role in consolidating that narrative of invincibility of the Modi-Shah duo, of their ability to mobilize resources and party workers and the alleged, organizational genius, the deployment of a formidable party machinery. I mean, all those are tangible and real elements. But this idea of, superpower was basically forged through this victory, which was a peculiar victory because, of course, you did not have an alliance of major regional parties. Congress and SP were in an alliance against the BJP and the BSP. And the results actually surprised everyone. I remember I was in Lucknow the day before the result. I had taken a class of my students from Ashoka to Lucknow, and the idea was to separate them and distribute them across party office, and they would talk to people and report what they would have seen and talked about during the day. And as we were having dinner the night before, after having visited the BJP office, where they told us, "Why have you come? Tomorrow is going to be a hung assembly. Nothing is going to happen. You've come for nothing." Later on in the evening, we were having dinner in one of the nice neighborhoods in old Lucknow, and next to those nice kebab places, you have really nice halwais, those traditional sweet shop. And there were those halwais were telling us, these elections, terrible, really bad for business. Everyone is expecting a hung parliament, and nobody placed any order of sweets. So we've actually lost a lot of. And the next day, the BJP sweeps 85% of the seats with, 42 or nearly 42%, a victory that they themselves had not anticipated. And there are many other indicators that show how clueless they were themselves about their victory. The reason I'm saying this is because my experience is that there's a really deep gap between perceptions that political parties have about themselves, whenever these perceptions are actually candid. They are marked by self-doubt, they're marked by unpredictability, uncertainty about outcomes, and the image that is being built about how parties define themselves and the image that they project after an election. We saw strong Shakti, we saw invincible, right? So the jump from self-doubt to that kind of, hubris in victory is very, very fast. But it's interesting that political parties are marked by, both trends at the same time. And of course, the UP victory also marked, spirits and marked, people's minds, because it led to the appointment of what can only be best described as a Hindu monk warrior as a chief minister, Yogi Adityanath. It was a campaign that mixed a lot of development plus communal elements, and it's very striking. You have a BJP that's always very self-confident, overconfident, you might even say, but at the same time resort publicly to the kind of divisive strategies that wisdom would recommend to do only in a hushed-up manner. You talk about Vikas in the open, and then you lead a very sort of undercover campaign, localized small interventions here and there to polarize, divide the electorate in order to manufacture some sort of your victories. But the kind of uncertainty that traversed the BJP throughout the period leads them to have those more overt forms of communal electoral politics than they would otherwise do. Something that we are observing right now in this general election campaign. Uttarakhand, they also swept, but that was expected. It's a really cyclical, it's a swing state with a really, really strong power capture by traditional elites, by upper caste. And then comes a fairly long period of time before the next round of elections at the very end of 2018, where to many people's surprise, the BJP loses 3 key states in the Hindi belt. Chhattisgarh, most spectacularly, and then Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan in really razor thin, well, defeat or victories according to which point of view you locate yourself, right? So, but before I come back, I will come back to these last 3 state elections. But the point that I wanted to make so far is to show that if you look at the performance in vote share, the more time passes after the general election, and the more the vote share of the BJP decreases over time. And we can use that as an indication that the myth of invincibility may just be only a myth, which does not amount to say that they don't have a lot of strength and comparative advantages and the state of the opposition is what it is, etc., obviously, but it's important to keep that in perspective. Now, this is a graph which is completely fictitious, does not correspond to any sort of political reality, at least for the upper line, right? So what I've done is put together the cumulated vote share of SP, BSP, and RLD in past elections to show you that this combination of parties on paper, the caste arithmetic, has been formidable for a very long time. And you may wonder why haven't they thought about this before? And to show you that a good reminder that before 2009, the BJP had been on a trajectory of important decline. And so from the point of view of opposition parties in UP, the alliance was the only logical choice, right? Absolutely necessary to compete, but to my mind, maybe, and I would even say probably, insufficient to win, right? Very quickly, there are problems with alliance making, particularly when parties still maintain some strong alignments with particular castes, like it is the case for BJP and the BSP. It's not obvious that BSP voters would transfer a vote in entirety to SP candidate, BSP candidate, and vice versa. Some votes will be lost in the process. Another limiting factor is the fact that those 3 parties, SP, BSP, and RLD, are playing a very traditional, conventional electoral political game, consisting everyone speaks to their base, mobilize their base, and count on the fact that they will come together on their own on the day of polling, but you don't see a lot of campaigning activities taking place jointly, or you don't see coordination between the workforce of those parties. They don't mobilize together. Everyone talks to their base separately, which makes this alliance quite unlikely to attract a lot of voters outside that equation of Jat in the West, Yadav, Jatav Dalits, and Muslim voters. If you add them together, it is a formidable alliance. But in order to beat the BJP, which is going to maintain high level of vote share, you need more than traditional vote banks in order to do so. And the alliance has not created a campaign or a message that enables them to go beyond their traditional vote bank. Another problem in UP also is that the Congress is playing spoiler. I've written, I can't go into a lot of detail why the Congress is not part of the alliance. Both sides are obviously blaming each other. But the fact is that the Congress is fielding a large number of candidates, and some of them are fairly strong, experienced candidates across UP, and they are more likely to dent into the alliance vote base than in the BJP's vote base, particularly the large number of Muslim candidates that they have fielded. So they could end up, without having prospects of winning more than a handful of seats, Amethi, Raebareli, and maybe Kushinagar, they don't have any prospects of winning majorly, but they could actually pave the way of a much better performance of the BJP, right? Other factors also, a breakaway faction from the Samajwadi Party, the PSP lawyer, that's Shivpal Singh Yadav, is also fielding a large number of candidates. None of them has any chance of winning a seat, maybe one if they get lucky, but these are former MPs, local MLAs, so locally implanted strong candidates who are also going to dent into the SP vote share. And the SP knows very well that they are going to hurt them, right? There's a failed alliance with Nishad, which illustrates further the difficulty of those three parties to go beyond their traditional vote base in this election. And there is also, and I have that from good sources, a fundamental lack of ambition from the part of Akhilesh Yadav, who's not targeting to win more than 35, 40 seats. And when you ask him why, you say, why don't you target 60 seats? With 60 seats, you can have an impact at the center. Yeah, so why do I want to do that? I don't want to be prime minister. So ask to those who want to become prime minister to do the job, right? And so all those factors combined make me think that although once formidable on paper, the alliance may not be as performant as we could have expected. Looking at the question of Congress resurgence, and I'm going to be very quick on that, the only major victory that the Congress scored in the Hindi belt was Chhattisgarh. You had a strong anti-incumbency against the Raman Singh government. There were clear limits to the Raman Singh model of governance in which you provide welfare, social services, you make the welfare function of the state function, but at the cost of providing representation to other groups than traditional elites, and that played massively against the BJP this time, right? If you look at Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, you have basically two razor-thin victories, nearly identical vote share, and it's only a 3-seat majority for Congress in Madhya Pradesh, and it's not very different in Rajasthan either, right? And which makes me think that traditionally we think that whoever wins those states close to the next general election, there's a spillover effect. But the fact that the numbers are so identical in terms of vote share that things could very easily go both ways in 2014. It's totally unpredictable how things are going to go. So it's not obvious. Obviously, it gives the Congress a boost, but it may not be decisive. And it may not be decisive because the performance of the Congress may have been good overall. They have increased their vote share. But if you look at the performance of their individual MLAs, most of them have been defeated. So everyone knows, or you've heard about anti-incumbency in Indian politics. If you look at individual anti-incumbency, you will see that most politicians in India do not serve more than one term, right? You have this sort of fly-by-night or rapid churning or turnover of the political class. In Madhya Pradesh, in an assembly of 230, there are only 31 re-elected MLAs. 77% of the current MLAs in Madhya Pradesh are first-time MLAs, which means that it's not just that voters targeted their ire or their anger towards one particular party, but against candidates across the board, regardless of party affiliation. And so you can detect an element of farmers' distress or anger, but it was also directed against Congress-sitting MLAs, right? A third factor which plays a very important role in the Hindi belt is the caste composition of majorities and governments. So we are familiar with the story of political change in northern India, decline of traditional elites, slow rise of lower castes, slow assertions of Muslim representations in the case of Uttar Pradesh. The fact is that, and despite a discourse based on inclusion, on inclusiveness, wherever the BJP has won in the Hindi belt, and actually beyond, that's the case in Assam as well, we have seen a very strong resurgence of representation of traditional elites, which in the case of northern India means basically upper caste. And within the upper caste, Rajputs or Thakurs in particular, right? So before the 2018 December election, the majority of 7 BJP chief ministers in the region were Thakurs. Beyond MLAs and political representation, there's been a wave of favoritism and preferentialism in nominations in important positions, SHOs, police, superintendents. The policy of encounters has actually majorly benefited Thakur policemen who went after gangsters to find an easy and quick way for promotion. And many of them have been promoted that way. And so you have many signs across the board that the BJP's rise has basically meant a resurgence and a reassertion of traditional elites. And when you look at the victories of the BJP in those regions, it is really we've limited the analysis to this idea of clubbing together a vast array, a social rainbow of aspirational voters. And it is true that the sociological composition of BJP voters has been very diverse, and that has propelled the BJP. But there's also a very strong element of assertiveness of traditional elites, guided by the accumulated resentment that they have faced, after a sentiment of having been displaced as traditional elites over time. And so in the Hindi belt, you go from 32% to 43% of upper caste representation in a short period of time. If you club other dominant groups such as Jat in Haryana, you also have an impressive increase. Across states, wherever the BJP perform, it has been the case. In UP, you go from 32 to 44%, right? And the same goes, and in UP, and I don't have much time to talk about this, but I can talk about this in questions, it has led of this resurgence of what's called Thakurwad, right? So you have, maybe you probably have seen those images of that, where is it? Here. That gentleman who assaulted one of his colleagues, the way a lot of people saw it was a Brahmin MPs putting in place an insolent Thakur MLAs who was basically claiming more importance for some marginal local event. And the man became Mr. Tripathi, what's his name? Sharad Tripathi, became an instant celebrity. A lot of people said, he did a good thing. He had to put, this was too much. We've become these, marginal players, and enough of this, Thakurwad. The 2 days after the incident, he drove to Lucknow in a motorcade of 200 vehicles, 200 cars, just to make his point further. And although he is not contesting, his father is contesting, and I'm quite sure that he will be re-elected. Very quickly, another aspect also. So UP has been famous or infamous for this encounter policy. And a lot of people have basically looked at, who are the victims, who are the targets, who have been the beneficiaries among the police. But there have been an unexpected, maybe, beneficiary of those policy, which is that wherever pressure has been put on gangsters affiliated with opposition parties, a lot of people have fled, gone undercover, and they have left behind them a sort of a void in the space of criminality, which is so, fundamentally part of everyday reality in UP. And that space has been almost entirely filled by members of the Hindu Yuva Vahini, who also happen to be largely Thakurs. And so you've seen before and after 2017, an organization which is a typical militant Hindu outfit turning into a classic Gunda criminal organization in UP. Let me skip this. This is to say that I think that the excesses of Thakurwad are going to generate some sort of backlash against the BJP. But I think it's going to be quite specific to a state like UP and not so much in other states, because in states where the Congress and the BJP are face-to-face, in bipartisan states, those two parties have the same strategy of co-opting traditional elites, right? Minas, Jats, Thakur, Brahmins. And if you look at the sociology of those parties, they basically largely undifferentiated. And so that preferentialism towards traditional elites is less likely to generate a backlash in states where the Congress basically has been doing the same thing, right? And this is the last slide I have, and which I borrow from a colleague, Niranjan Sarkar, which basically shows that in Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, in the recent election, the higher the population of agricultural laborer in a constituency, the worse the performance of the BJP was. The BJP lost across the board, rural area, urban areas. They lost a lot of voters across the territory, but they lost more vote share and more strike rate in areas where the agricultural laborers, so that's not necessarily landowners, but laborers, is actually higher, which seems to give some empirical validity to the theme that there is a rural anger that is being targeted at whoever is in power. And in a way, because they've swept and they've won so many places, the BJP is the target of that anger in those areas. And so these are my conclusions, is that the fact that the BJP will not repeat its 2014 performance seems to me absolutely certain. One does not see how they would do that. But the extent or the amplitude of the decline is fundamentally unpredictable. There are too many imponderable factors: Pulwama, communalism, farmers' distress, youth vote, alliance arithmetic, Congress performance. The outcome in Bihar, which I haven't mentioned, is also very uncertain. The role of incumbency, what will be the level of turnout? We see that it's a little bit lower. And the question then becomes, the larger the beyond question, is can the BJP compensate its losses in the Hindi belt with gains elsewhere? Sarayu will talk about the South, so I'm not mentioning anything. But the two large states where the BJP is expected to make gains, Orissa and West Bengal, it doesn't look certain that they can actually make gains that would be sufficient to even compensate for the losses, right? Now, the next question, which Rahul will address later on, is can the opposition sort of fill in the gap or close the gap sufficiently? Right, I've spoken too much as usual, but thank you very much.
Could I just yank this out and because I don't need the laptop. Yeah, thank you. Start. So thank you very much for having me here to talk about elections and elections in the South particularly. In the true spirit of South Indian exceptionalism, I will say that, to speak to Gilles' point as well as what hopefully Rahul will say, is that the South in some ways may also offer points of resistance to the rise of the BJP. I think the context from which I speak is the tendency to reduce conversations about elections mainly to predictions about who will win and who will lose, and focus less on the shifts and changes that may underlie these electoral changes. And what I hope to do in the course of this talk is to highlight some of these issues at the state level that might be relevant, that might not just shed light on who is going to win or who is going to lose, or who is going to earn seats and who is going to lose seats, but also comment on sort of the changes and shifts that are happening in the realm of politics, in the realm of parties, and political institutions. So I'll go state-wise, and what I hope to do within each state is to talk about one sort of broader theme that might be relevant in thinking about political shifts and changes, but also sort of what I call a horizontal theme, for lack of a better word, I suppose, but something that is significant at the state level from the electoral perspective. So I would talk about social media in a couple of these states. I talk about memes in a couple of these states. Now, the reason I bring these up, and these might have manifestations in other states as well, but they are things to think about how electoral discourses are being shaped, about how issues have risen to importance, and the way in which citizens' engagement with politics itself is in the throes of change. And of course, you can't step away from the question of predictions entirely. So in some senses, what this is going to try and ask or query is to what extent can the BJP offset its fairly certain losses in the Hindi heartland and in the south, where it has its allies, with gains in states where it hasn't had much traction before. So we'll go state-wise. The first being Tamil Nadu. 39 seats go to election, I think 38, because Vellore has, the poll has been cancelled. In 2014, the AIDMK won 37 out of the 39 seats, so it fairly swept into power at both the state level as well as it won all the seats in the Lok Sabha. These elections are both happening simultaneously this time as well. The framing context, I think, for Tamil Nadu, besides sort of the broader political context, is the death of two leaders. That's the AIADMK as well as the DMK lost former chief ministers, and the current chief ministers from the AIADMK, but that's in a bit of it's a fairly delicate balance. Now, the point that is important or interesting to raise or think about in the context of Tamil Nadu would be what I call the difference, and this has again been spoken of fairly extensively in the literature, the difference between regionalist political parties, such as the AIADMK and the DMK, which mobilize on regional and regional nationalistic issues, versus regionally located political parties, like the JDS in Karnataka, which is not necessarily a party that mobilizes on issues relating to Kannada, but mobilizes on a broader range of issues. So it's a regionally located political party. For a better discussion of this, do look at a recent podcast with Professor K.K. Kailash at the University of Hyderabad. He's written extensively about this, but this is something to inquire into. Now, the state of Tamil Nadu itself is a cradle of the Dravidian movement, and the Dravidian movement, and I'm being reductive here, and there's a huge literature around the Dravidian movement that one must look into. But what it did was consolidate many identities under a broad Dravidian regional identity. It has problematically excluded several caste identities, and there's Hugo Gorringe's work, there's Karthikeyan Damodaran, there's Andrew Wyatt, all of whom speak about a range of issues and the way in which Dalit politics has been subsumed by a larger Dravidian identity. But what this means electorally is that mobilization within Tamil Nadu has been or continues to be fairly built upon resentment of central interference in state affairs. You can see that in the mobilization and the conversations around the GST, where Jayalalitha had made several statements at different points of time around the use of GST. The writing, somewhat problematic, around population decline in Tamil Nadu and what that means for delimitation and electoral politics in the future, and a range of other issues. So region or Tamil Nadu, and of course Hindi, have been issues that have been raised in Tamil Nadu in electoral politics for a long period of time. Now, this offers a very interesting lens through which current politics and current mobilizations may be looked at. So it gives you, for instance, to speak of a very current event, Kanimoy's house was raided 2 days ago, right? So it gives, in some way, a lens to the DMK to position this as the center interfering in the state or in the lives of state politicians. So this kind of issue, where there is a political party which mobilizes in a state on the basis of issues that are relevant to the state mean that electoral contests, whether at the assembly level or at the Lok Sabha level, are fought on state issues. Now, this is slightly different from other states, and we'll get to that. A horizontal issue, stepping into the horizontal issue that I think is maybe of interest in the context of Tamil Nadu, is that there's sort of recent discussion around the use of an app by the DMK to manage its cadre. Now, I'm sure this exists in other political parties, quite obviously it does, I'm sure. But one of the most interesting things about this is that it marries an online strategy of communication directly to the voter base, either through social media or through like broader electoral campaigns like door-to-door contact, with a robust offline contact, where your cadre is managed through an electronic process. So each time you go to a voter's house and knock on their door, it's geotagged, and the party gets a aggregate information about how cadre are reaching out to the voter base. Now, again, this is a fairly initial exploration of this phenomenon. But as we think about how political parties are changing to adapt with the times, and how political party strategies are either magnified or eroded by technology, this might be something interesting to think of. So in the context of Tamil Nadu, two interesting things, therefore, are the nature of regionalism or the regional political party, and perhaps the use of technology by the political parties to manage the cadre and then reach out. Let's jump into Kerala, which is next door, where the LDF is in power presently at the assembly level. And in 2014, there was a split between the LDF and the UDF in terms of the votes. I think both of them got, the UDF did a little better, but there was a division in the number of seats. In terms of the context, state elections happened almost exactly 2.5 years ago, which means that there is some measure of performance by which to assess the state government in power, but also it's the middle of the term, so it's hard to say. And then there is, of course, the big issue of Sabarimala, which has been happening since the last year. So in terms of the broader point I'd like to bring up in the context of Kerala is the use of religion as a way, by political parties as a way to consolidate votes. And this, the BJP stand on Sabarimala has been fairly consistent with the broader BJP narrative of a unified Hindu identity, which is basically creating a common cause to oppose other parties. Now, this has two potential uses. One is to signal to Hindus within Kerala, such as through the Nair Service Society, which is to signal a common Hindu identity on which mobilization may be based, which can yield benefits for the BJP. But another potential interesting point around the BJP's use of nationalism, particularly in the context of Sabarimala, is to signal to its own base in other parts of the country, such as in Uttar Pradesh. And this might also be linked in some ways to its inability, say, with the Ram Mandir, but in keeping with their broader pan-Hindu vision. And this is also, for instance, one of the reasons why the UP Chief Minister came to Kerala and lectured on development. Anyway, so an allied point around this might be the rise of moderate Hinduism, which Shashi Tharoor has been speaking of recently in some contexts, which might be also a way to respond to the broader centralizing, compelling narrative of Hindutva. So that is, I think, in Kerala, a set of one factor that might be in operation in thinking about electoral politics. So to what extent is Sabarimala, which has been the plank of a national party in Kerala, going to yield votes for it? In terms of the horizontal issue, I think that is something that is fairly fascinating, which is the role of memes in political dissent. This is something that is existing in Tamil Nadu as well. But I think Kerala presents an example, and there is also some literature emerging around this now, around the sort of the combination of literacy, film culture, and political dissent to produce memes as the response or a political critique. There's the Troll Republic. There's a Kerala police page, which I learned has 1 million likes, which is a site for all kinds of memes being posted. And memes are used both to mobilize as well as to convey dissent. Now, this is very interesting because it's creating a new vocabulary of political conversations, which might not always be as political. So it's a point of interest, I think, both from the perspective of this election and the way it is able, way memes are able to bring together voters, and even more broad term, long term, in the way that dissent and critique are being formed. So some of these critiques might not always be political, in the sense that they're not ideologically motivated, but they are political. And how does that transform how young people particularly engage with the polity might be something to inquire about. So this Kerala seems to be the cauldron of this kind of political narrative. So again, something worth inquiring about. Definitely more research is required. Now so Kerala was, I think, the use of religion as a plank by a national party in a context where it has had no traction. And the second might be the use of memes as political narrative. We'll jump into Andhra Pradesh, which is 25 seats now post the split. It was 42 seats prior to the split, but 25 now after the split between Andhra and Telangana. In 2014, the TDP won, I think, 16 seats. Mainly on a development plank, and it's an NDA ally. In terms of the context in Andhra Pradesh, there is the TDP split from the NDA itself, which happened a few months ago. Andhra Pradesh is one of the states where there is, from the CSDS data, a greater dissatisfaction with the state government than with the central government. So that's an important context to remember. And there is sort of an interesting array of political parties that are contesting. There's the YSRCP, which is YS Rajshekar Reddy's son, Jagan, who's formed the YSRCP as a split from the Congress. And the KK Kailash is called the joker in the pack, Pawan Kalyan, whose impact is perhaps uncertain, or maybe not. So in terms of the points that might be worth considering in the context of Andhra Pradesh, one interesting thing, and it in some ways speaks to what I've been saying around Tamil Nadu as well, is the use of federalism to build a regional identity. The 2014 election itself, at both the state level as well as at the national level, was fairly fought on the issue of development. But what has happened subsequently is that it's become important for Chandrababu Naidu and the TDP to break away, because some of the dissatisfaction with the central government might be something that also attaches to him, and decoupling from the broader narrative of the central government is something that is relevant. So in sometime last year, there was a no confidence motion that Chandrababu Naidu moved and used it to implicate both the BJP and the Congress as being oppressive to the Telugu identity, as the 3 or 4 demands around special status not having been fulfilled, and therefore he broke away from the alliance. While that was something that happened in Delhi, the theater was in Delhi, the actual audience was perhaps in Andhra Pradesh. So it was in some way an effort to decouple and build a stronger regional identity of Andhra as a state that has been, that has not received what it should from the center. Now, this kind of process is similar to Tamil Nadu, but this is a process that is happening post the formation of the state, and in a fairly artificial way to set aside and also as a political strategy to decouple from the union government. But at the same time, there's also the YSRCP, which is a political party of some significance, which has gained traction and is again is a player to watch out for. And there's Pawan Kalyan, who, because of the caste arrangement in Andhra Pradesh, might have traction with young people as well as with the Kapus, which are a dominant community and the base of the TDP, again harming the TDP's prospects in this election. That is very, in very short, the broad issues that are in play in Andhra Pradesh. But in terms of a horizontal issue that might be worth considering, and this is again something that has had traction in recent times as well in the context of Karnataka yesterday and Tamil Nadu, is the issue of voter deletions. Jagan and Naidu have been trading allegations, saying that each party is responsible for deleting supporters of the other political party. And there has been, intermediating this, some comments by the Election Commission that they have used deduplication software. A lot of this is fairly murky, and there is a case pending in the High Court. But this, in itself, raises a very interesting question about how technology mediates the process of conducting elections, which is an issue that is relevant across states, but raises questions on the meaning of political participation and avenues available to exercise constitutional rights. Let's jump over to Karnataka, and I think some of the issues may be something that Rahul will bring up, but in very short, Karnataka contributed the highest number of MPs for the Congress party. That was 9 out of their total of 44, including Kharge. In terms of the context in Karnataka, I think issues worth thinking about is the recent assembly election, which happened in 2018, where it's a little bit uncertain as to who won and who lost. But there is a delicate balance in place where there's a government that is supported, where the Congress and the JDS are in an alliance. So in some ways, the Karnataka election, the Lok Sabha elections that are happening might not be as much of a referendum on the governance of this government that is in place, but in some ways a referendum on the state of affairs, and that is worth thinking about. The interesting thing about Karnataka is it is fairly the only state in the south where it's a contest between the two big national parties, with the JDS being the third party that is located in Karnataka. Unlike the AIADMK and the DMK, and to some extent the TDP, and then even the TRS in Telangana, the JDS is a regionally located party, not so much a regionalist party. So it does not mobilize so much on a Kannada identity or a Kannadiga nationalism identity as much as it does on broader issues of development, farmers, and contextual issues. So in this context, it's worthwhile thinking about the assembly elections that recently happened, where it was fairly a contest between the two national parties. The Congress behaved very interestingly in Karnataka in 2018, where they behaved a little bit like a regional party. They raised the issue of the flag, the Karnataka flag. Siddaramaiah wrote a letter to the 15th Finance Commission talking about allocation issues with respect to Karnataka. There was the metro issue. There were a range of other issues in play as well. But in some ways, what the Congress tried to do in 2018 was behave like a regional party in order to counter the nationalistic narratives or the centralizing tendencies of the BJP. So you keep the context and the contest here. So you make national leaders or national issues irrelevant in the context. I don't know how much that worked out. I don't know if analytically there is as much of a sense of what happened really in Karnataka. But if you look at the campaign, and I think again Rahul hopefully will speak a little more about it, it has been fairly national with the, sorry? Are you? So it has been fairly national with the BJP and speaking about Modi, and the Congress hopefully speaking about Nyay. In fact, the extent to which Modi is the main theme of the election is apparent in the comment of Tejasvi Surya, who said a vote for Modi is a vote for India. Whereas, so there's a unification of all of the personalities, and that the battleground for that seems to be fairly Karnataka. The other interesting point that might be worth thinking about in the context of Karnataka is the JDS, which is, as I said, a regionally located political party. What happened in the 2018 elections was that the JDS's success were fairly confined to a small region within Karnataka itself, where they managed to get traction, and seem to have mobilized on the basis of caste. So the Okkaliga community is fairly central to the JDS's success in Karnataka. I wonder if this is an indication that regionally located political parties need to mobilize on the basis of castes or on the basis of regions in order to have political traction. I don't know, and that's a question I think worth asking. In terms of the horizontal issue, I think I'm fairly running out of time. So I'll skip that, but I hope to talk about how urban voters are behaving and complicate the story of the BJP's rise in Karnataka, which the BJP's rise in urban areas within Karnataka has not only been based on the youth or the liberal or the shiny new votes, but also on a fair strategy of accumulating instrumentally voters who live in the peripheries of cities, mostly migrant voters, through a conscious process of offering housing and some measures of Hindutva, particularly for Odia and Rajasthani migrants in the peripheries of Bangalore. Let's jump into Telangana, which has 17 seats, very quickly. Recent assembly elections where the TRS swept, and KCR has been elected chief minister. This is one of the few states where the satisfaction with the state government is very high relative to the central government. And that has been perhaps the reason why KCR dissolved the assembly and advanced the elections, because he might not have wanted some of the anti-incumbency or dissatisfaction with the central government to get attached to his own elections. An interesting issue that might be worth thinking about in the context of Telangana is the integration by KCR in the last 5 years of welfare with religion. There has been quite a lot of writing about this, about how KCR has integrated a bouquet of welfare policies targeted towards farmers with overt practices of Hinduism, such as giving money to temples, committing that all government buildings would be built with Vastu, and while maintaining the idea that Hyderabad is an investment-friendly state. So this combination is in some ways an interesting evolution of how patronage could work, and might be worthwhile exploring from the academic perspective as well, as to how political leaders, particularly regional political leaders, might see the need to marry welfare, strong welfare programs, particularly Telangana, which is a revenue surplus state, marry strong welfare programs with overt religiosity to counter some of the nationalistic imperatives of parties like the BJP, which is trying to make inroads in the context of Telangana. I think the horizontal issue that might be worth considering is post-movement politics. Of course, there's a huge literature around this, but I think one of the most interesting things to consider is the dissent within the Telangana movement itself, with Professor Kodandaram forming a separate political unit, which interestingly, because it is post-mobilization, has been on issues like agrarian distress, corruption, and youth. So to think about how political dissent within movements gets actuated in political formations might be something worth thinking about. So I think overall, these 5 states each present fairly unique contexts within which the current election is being fought, which will play a significant role in the way voting happens. The proximity to the most recent assembly elections, certain relevant issues at the state level, the performance of state politics over the past 5 years are all issues that are relevant in thinking about how this election will go forward. If you think about each state, sort of the broader theme within each state, the lens to look at Tamil Nadu is perhaps through the lens of how regional issues have become relevant. It might be that the AIADMK does get some traction, particularly because the chief minister belongs to a community which has historically not had representation as a CM. So he's from the Gounder community, and there has not been a Gounder CM in the past. So that might be something that gains them traction. But having said that, the whole issue of how Tamil Nadu as a state is in some ways exceptional is something worth thinking about. Kerala, it will be interesting to see the extent to which religion as an issue gains traction, allowing for political change to occur. And then again, AP and Telangana are places where political parties have tried to craft regional identities in a very contemporary sense, and it's interesting to see how that will actually yield dividends for them. That's it.
Okay, after 2 interesting presentations, get ready for the most boring one. And my name is Rahul Verma. I am a fellow at Center for Policy Research. I study elections, voting behavior, and parties. And I do love to make forecasts. They often go wrong. But so in the beginning, let me give you a summary of my talk. So I'll make basically talk about 3 broad points, and feel free to fall off to sleep after listening to these 3 points. First, it's a cliche, but 2019 election is really, really important. Important because it may endure a new party system. So I'm a political scientist. We really care about party systems because it structures the nature of competition. The second, and I shouldn't be saying this in southern India, but South is actually not going to be really, really important for the outcome of 2019 elections. The battle is actually going to be fought. So it doesn't mean South doesn't matter, but just the way the electoral contest is stacked this time, actually the losses and gains for the BJP is going to cancel out between South, East, and West. What happens in the Hindi heartland will decide whether BJP along with its current partners reaches close to majority mark or not. Most polls have been suggesting that the NDA would be in striking distance of majority. The third point, which is basically why I'm here, is to speak about the future of Congress party and regional parties. And if you think of party politics in terms of party system and competition, then it does matter what Congress and regional parties do, but it also matters what BJP is going to do, right? So parties are work, if not work, at least they do things in relation to one another. So they are sort of constrained and have opportunities to do. So these are the 3 basic things which I'm going to cover in next 25 minutes. First, why is 2019 important? Because many of us think that post-2014, India is virtually in the 4th party system. So what do we mean by a party system? In a party system, basically it's the rule of electoral competition, informal rule of electoral competition. It matters for 2 things. First, it matters to voters because that's the menu they are going to choose from, right? You can't choose something which you don't have as an option. Second, it matters for parties because parties, their behavior is constrained by the system of competition. So what has happened post-2014, that we are in virtually 2nd dominant party system, which is being led by the BJP. So what do I mean by a dominant party system? Dominant party systems have 4 characteristics. 1, there is an ideological project which has some sort of hegemonical status. Second, the party that leads the dominant party system has a deep organizational root or deep organizational power. And third, the dominant party systems are led by a charismatic leadership, right? So you may like or not like the leader, but there is a charisma associated with that leadership. And fourth, there is an electoral dominance of that party. So by 2nd dominant or BJP-led dominant party system, I am not saying BJP is going to win every election, right? The argument behind the 2nd dominant party system is that BJP is going to be the focal point of all electoral alignments and realignments. So this is 4th party system. The first one, so what I'm trying to do is, you're going to go think of movie Inception. I'm going to make you think certain things. 1952 to 67 was the first party dominant system, right? First party system, which was a Congress dominant system, where Congress was the focal point of all electoral competition. Everything was happening in favor or against the Congress. In the 2nd dominant party system, in the 2nd party system, which was started in 1967 after the loss of Congress party in certain states, Congress basically saw opposition in many states. So Congress remained electorally dominant at the national level, but at the state level, there were competition to the Congress party. In the 3rd party system, which started in 1989, we were virtually in the post-Congress polity phase where you had fragmentation, right? And in the 4th party system, which some of us argue that it started post-2014 with the rise of BJP, where BJP has become the focal point of competition. Now, if BJP loses this election 2019 and it also loses a couple of state elections, the 4th party system would die a premature death. But if it doesn't happen, then what we're going to see that the electoral competition is going to be decided by what BJP does in the system, right? So that's like very, very important. It is important to understand also the rise of the BJP. So the rise of BJP in 2014 is not by an accident. And the decline of Congress is not also a one-shot game. It has been happening for a long period of time, and the rise of the BJP has been also happening for a long period of time, right? If you think about the first party system, the seeds of Congress demise was shown there in some ways, and the story of rise of a party like BJP was written. Many of you must have read B.D. Graham's book, Hindu Nationalist, like B.D. Graham's, what was the name? No, Bruce D. Graham's book. So the book was sort of like written in 1990, and Graham asks a very, very important question. In 1947, there were three groups of Hindu politicians. The first group was within the Congress party, led by Sardar Patel, Purushottam Das Tandon, and others. Then there was a second group of Hindu politicians who were in RSS and Bharatiya Janata Sangh. And the third group of Hindu politicians were in Hindu Mahasabha, Ram Raj Parishad of Karpatri Maharaj. So the question which Graham asked, that in 1947, it was not like, we don't know which of these three groups is going to lead the charge of Hindu nationalism in India. In 2014 or in 2019, we know it is BJP. But it was not clear in 1947 which one would do that. So what has happened in these three-party systems, slowly the right wing, what you understand as a Hindu right, slowly converged together. In 1952, you had 3-4 parties. By 67, all of these parties, Hindu Mahasabha, Ram Rajya Parishad, and some Ganatantra party in Odisha, so these smaller parties got converged and they become Bharatiya Janata Sangh in 1967, right? What happens between 1967 and 1989, that the right-leaning elements within the Congress party slowly moved away from so Congress was making a move towards a left, and the right-leaning elements within the Congress party felt marginalized, and they slowly moved towards the BJP. Whereas the left-leaning elements of the Congress party, basically first they became the socialist parties in 1930s and 40s, socialist parties further disintegrated, became Janata Dal and all the regional parties we see. So the reason is that Congress party slowly shrunk from the right, which basically moved towards the BJP, and from the left, which basically moved towards the regional parties. So to understand the origins of regional parties and why Congress is in current shape and why BJP is a large umbrella coalition of right-wing parties is this historical journey. Now, if you understand this journey, it means that the revival of Congress, if it has to happen, it will be a long shot game. It cannot happen in one election. The reason, because the decline has been slow and arduous, right? In 2014, what happened with the Congress party was not just an electoral defeat. It, like in Suhas Palshikar's word, it had recipe for electoral disaster in some ways, right? And the reason why some of us think that 2014 was not one-shot game, that even in the anti-Congress wave of 1977 and 1989, the defeat of the Congress was not that bad, right? The party in 1970s, after the defeat, still had 30% vote share and had only lost 5 seats as security deposit. So you lose your security deposit as a candidate when you poll less than 1/6 of the votes. So in 1977, anti-emergency wave, Congress loses deposit only in 5 seats, right? In 18 seats. In 1989, Congress, the Bofors and everything, Janata Dal thing, Congress loses deposits only in 5 seats. But in 2014, Congress lost deposit in 179 seats. It contested 464 seats and lost deposit in 179 seats, which means that at least in one in every 3 Congress candidate lost the deposit, right? So the reason of the Congress decline has been ideological. It has slowly got, and like it may be not surprising, But many stalwarts of the Congress party, because during the second party system, Congress moved towards left, they were in fact founder members of many right-wing organizations. Gulzari Lal Nanda, two-time interim prime minister, was also one of the founding members sitting on the dais when the Vishwa Hindu Parishad was formed. And in fact, even in 2014, like the Congress party's report suggests, or at least the internal report written by A.K. Antony suggests, that the perception against the Congress party is that it has become an anti-Hindu party, right? And if you look closely, analyze the results or the voting survey data, what is happening is, so B.D. Graham has made a distinction between Hindu traditionalist and Hindu nationalist, right? Hindu nationalists are those who sort of like put the nation first, so RSS and Savarkarite tradition would be that. The Hindu traditionalist, which was in the Congress party, that voting bloc within the Congress party has moved towards the BJP and the right. So there is a difference, ideological difference between these two groups. Second point on the extent of Congress decline is that in more than 200 seats, like the states which represent more than 200 seats in the parliament, Congress has not been in power in those states for more than 25 years. So West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Congress has never been in power in those states since 1989, right? So basically, Congress is virtually a non-existent party or organization in many of these states. In fact, even where in some of the states where Congress party does well, when it has BJP as its main opponent. So think of Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Rajasthan, Gujarat, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh. In all these states, Congress's main opposition is the BJP. Whereas in West Bengal, Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, and Bihar, Congress is non-existent and regional parties have taken over the space. And one of the primary reasons why that has happened, we argue, is that the Congress party fails to distinguish itself ideologically in these states from the regional parties. One of the reasons, like everyone was talking about and had dreams of a Mahagathbandhan at least a year ago, that there would be a national Mahagathbandhan led by the Congress party, that didn't materialize because regional parties have an incentive to keep Congress in permanent decline mode. Their rise has been because of the Congress decline. The BSP basically grew because the dissatisfied Dalit voters of the Congress party, that's basically Kanchan Chandra's thesis. The Dalit dissatisfied voters moved towards the Congress party. OBCs in 60s and 70s thought that they are not getting proper representation within the Congress party. That led to the formation of many regional parties, which are basically backward caste parties, right? So in a way, there is a tension between regional party and Congress party for survival and expansion. So that's like a very, very important point to keep in mind. And in fact, if you just look at the 2014 result, what is very striking about that result is that the big gains that the BJP makes is at the expense of Congress party, right? So most of the regional parties, except say UP and Bihar, especially on the coast, most regional parties sort of like manage to save their fort, right? And what BJP is doing now is making inroads both in east and in south. And as I completely agree with Sarayu, I think in 2019 it would be hard for BJP to make serious inroads in the South India. But in east, like even if they don't manage to convert into seats, they are going to become at least principal opposition parties in West Bengal and Odisha, which means that the nature of competition in those two states would change if there is a stability to that system, right? The nature of competition would change. Even in Bihar, where BJP was like a junior ally of JDU, again, they have conceded 17 seats, but like come the state assembly election and you would see that the competition is essentially going to be between RJD and BJP. So BJP has, in some ways, has gained a state, right? It has become one of the principal players in the politics of Bihar. It will become a principal player in politics of West Bengal and Odisha. So a party which was restricted to largely the Hindi heartland in pre-2014, Hindi heartland and some western states, has expanded its footprint in eastern India. So basically, my two big final points are: one, what is going to happen beyond 2019? Of course, one, it depends who is going to win the election, whether BJP along with its allies manage to form the government or not. If it forms the government, something which is bound to happen to BJP, that process will slow down, right? So parties in their expansionist mode always bring in certain contradictory tendencies. That happened with the Congress party. Congress was the dominant player, and then suddenly the cracks open. So same thing would happen with BJP. It's no different. All organizations develop that tendency. So that's the first thing, how BJP deals with those contradictions. And second, given some of the regional parties are going to sort of lose their status, there is going to be a space for reorganization of so the party system which began in the wake of 2014, it is going under a churning, and the whole space is going to be reorganized. So let me first deal with the first part of the puzzle, which is what is BJP going to do? So first, BJP is going to face the big challenge of power seekers versus ideological project, right? When you expand, when the party expands, it brings in a lot of elements or candidates or politicians who do not share their ideological project. But they are sort of winnable candidates, they become powerful in the party, and then there is a tension between those who are the ideological vanguards and those who hold the power. So at least in Eastern India, in many states, BJP is wholesale, there was a wholesale migration of politicians from other parties to the BJP. And they necessarily do not share the ideological vision of the BJP. So there would be a tension: who wins the battle, the ideological vanguards or those who hold the power? That's an important thing. Second, what has happened in last 20 years, and I think this should be researched, understood, BJP has completely transformed itself, right? So we all think BJP is a Hindi heartland Brahmin Baniya party. No, that is not true anymore. If BJP used to get 100 votes in 1996, 45 of them used to be from upper caste. That share has dropped to 31 now. And the share of OBCs and SC/STs within the BJP social coalition has increased, right? So there is a mandalization of BJP going on in some ways. But BJP's leadership structure has remained unchanged, something which Gilles pointed out, and the center he runs, TCPD, has collected interesting data on the sociological profile of MPs and MLAs. So what we know, that despite this change in the BJP social base, its leadership structure remains largely upper caste. Most of the MPs are upper caste, most of the chief ministers are upper caste, most of the ministers in the union cabinet are upper caste. So there would be a tension. There would be a tension that the social base has changed, leadership hasn't changed. There would be a conflict, right? The third one is basically the ideological coalitions that brought BJP to the power. There would be a delinking. Delinking on at least two issues. One issue is basically related to the question of reservation and majoritarianism. So especially the younger voters do not share there is at least good evidence to suggest that the younger voters are not as anti-Muslim as the older voters are, right? Whereas BJP's, at least you can hear the rhetorics of BJP leaders, so that tension would develop. The second one is BJP's younger voters, basically working in tech companies, startups, right? Like the young millennial voters, they show some liberal attitudes on social norms. Social norms meaning who to date, when to drink, who to marry, right? So on some of those things, they are showing liberal tendencies, whereas the BJP leadership doesn't, right? So that would be the third challenge which BJP is going to face. Now, in some ways, all these challenges are not very apparent because you have a dressing down from a very charismatic leader, right? So as long as Modi remains at the helm of affairs, these contradictions would like be there, but somehow will get managed, right? Like in some ways, BJP is not contesting 2019 election. Modi is contesting this election on the behalf of BJP, and BJP is playing second fiddle to the leader. Like, look at the slogans and everything. So as long as the charismatic leader remains the helm of the affairs, these contradictions would be there, and if BJP wins the election, these would be like there, but won't unravel. But if BJP loses the election, Modi goes up for a toss, these things would unravel like anything, right? Till Indira Gandhi was at the helm of Congress party, those contradictions within the Congress party were there, but Congress remained nationally powerful. As soon as Indira Gandhi goes away, Congress party just unravels like anything. So similar things may happen to BJP. So the first part of the puzzle, what happens to the party system, depends on what BJP does on these three things, right? The second part of the puzzle is basically what would the Congress party and regional parties do in this election and beyond. So largely the story of this election is over, right? It seemed that, so in some ways, Congress has managed to survive through its one of the worst electoral phases, and they should have a sigh of relief. And regional parties in many parts of the country continue to hold their fort. So there is no danger to say BJD losing everything, but of course now they're getting a tough challenger, same in West Bengal. But what is happening is that at least one principal player, which is the group of like communist parties, are going to lose, like permanently lose their stature of like being an important bloc in the parliament. So it is very much possible, like in Tripura, not in Tripura, but in West Bengal, the left vote basically goes to BJP, which means like the share of left parties would decline, and both in terms of electoral space as well as ideological space, Congress party would get an opportunity to capture that social democratic space. So if you look at some of the things Rahul Gandhi has been saying, I think Congress party for its own good seems to be moving away from the NAC days and is becoming much more pragmatic, and in some ways, I think like if they manage to survive this election and plan carefully, they may able to adopt ideological pole, both in opposition to BJP and also in opposition to many regional parties. I think the Congress party, and Gilles has written about it, and I also said something about this, that Congress party in this election faces an internal dilemma, right? And that dilemma is not easy to, like, there is no solution to it. What do? Do you fight this election to sort of like just defeat Modi and survive, or you also have a long haul strategy where you try to sort of build your base slowly? So some would argue that you must have a survival instinct and do something at the moment, and others would say politics is a long game, play for the long haul. There is no easy solution, and especially like a bad example from the cricket, right? Like, and I'm not comparing BJP to certain cricketers, but like when a Virender Sehwag or a Chris Gayle is in form, no matter how you ball, the ball reaches boundary somehow, right? Even a miss hit will go to the boundary, Yorker would be converted into a full toss. So what has been happening with the Congress, that they are making efforts, but that like none of those efforts are sticking, right? It's just like, it's some of these things are getting boomeranged in some ways. So that's, I think, in terms of like the electoral and ideological space, what Congress party needs to do is occupy a space which is both in opposition, because BJP under Modi is going to go further right, sad news. But for Congress party, it's a good news, because if BJP moves further right, Congress party again gets to occupy a position which is in opposition to BJP as well as in opposition to, so it can distinguish from these regional parties. And I think like finally, most of the regional parties, so that there isn't a chance that these regional parties are going to expand beyond their core geographical states. They will remain there. Some of them would lose their current status. So the change of hands is going to be between basically regional parties. Think of like basically JDU and RJD. JDU would sort of like lose its position, RJD will grow to its former Janata Dal days. Similarly, I think in AIDMK, DMK, this, like it was the same party, so AIDMK might shrunk further and DMK might increase its vote share a little bit more. So there would be a lot of configuration within the states, and there is a possibility of a reconfiguration of party system nationally where Congress can occupy a position. However, given all the arithmetic and all the numbers, it is very less likely that Congress can make serious gains this time. So triple digit is hard. Thank you.
When you mentioned that the SP and BSP leaders are voting separately with the traditional voters, having observed how the coalition thing here has failed badly by doing the opposite, by trying to do everything together, I wonder if the UP politicians have actually been smarter in saying let's address our constituencies separately. I just wanted to comment on that. And the lack of ambition can be seen even among the Congress if they're fielding candidates at the risk of losing a seat to the BJP. What is the ambition of the Congress? Is it a long-term ambition, or are they willing to forego the national election this time? And I had one question about how the BJP is changing that Rahul alluded to. Are there inside conversations? We don't get to hear about the inside conversations within the BJP the way we do about other parties, but what is this sort of ideological differentiation? Is there any such thing happening? Yeah.
All right. Yeah, it's a good point actually. I haven't thought of comparing the configuration of alliance mobilization in Karnataka with UP, and given the history of acrimony between those parties and between their organizations, maybe indeed it's for the best for them that they do mobilize separately. The problem is that you cannot win an election solely on the base of narrow segmentary mobilization, on the mobilization of narrow segments of the electorate. Because this kind of vote bank politics is pretty much a thing of the past. Now, there is something I often tell my students is, if maybe there's one thing that holds true for India, is that history or change is always cumulative rather than substitutive, in the sense that whatever new forms of politics emerge, they never completely displace or erase the old forms. And so caste politics is here to stay, vote bank politics is here to stay, but you have to complement it with other forms of mobilization, just like a social media campaign is a complement to traditional forms of mobilization. And so because in the past, whenever parties have mobilized their core electoral base, it has led to this intense fragmentation of the electorate, the party system, which has led to chronic instability in UP. And so parties have had to build basically a platform that was, at least on the surface, more inclusive. Kam bolta hai, talk about development, talk about achievement, talk about promises, talk about the promise of not discriminating or not treating any group preferentially, not discriminating on the basis of caste. And that's the narrative that it's missing. You don't really know what the alliance is fighting for, except that they're fighting the BJP. And that's helping the BJP to create those false equivalences. They are against me, or Modi actually, they are against me, I'm against terrorism, I am against poverty, which are complete false equivalences. And so maybe it's a better thing that they do mobilize separately, but they would need to do something else. And that's particularly absent. What is the Congress doing in UP? What is the ambition? It's a very good question. I'm not even sure that they have an answer or coherent answer themselves. And I mean, you speak about people from the Congress, in the UP cadre and in Delhi, and they tell you that this is not about 2019, this is preparing the future, this is about preparing, 2022 or wherever would be the next election. And it always strikes me as a little bit curious that you would basically treat an election as a way or a means to build organization rather than build organizations for the purpose of fighting elections. I mean, they're clearly putting, you know, what's the expression in English? I mean, the horse before the cart. And so they tell us it's important that Priyanka gets involved because it's preparing the future. Yeah, I mean, the future is fine, but you still have that election to fight. And while you're preparing your own future, you know, everyone else has to suffer the consequences, right? And so that is a little bit curious. Now, on the questions of undifferentiation, it takes place when there's actually no real other players than Congress or BJP. Wherever you have strong regional parties, it forces parties to, in a way, define their identity a little bit more acutely. While in states where the competition is bipolar, both major parties tend to run after the same kind of voters. And so if you look, I have data on this which I haven't shown today, but if you were to substitute caste for parties in electoral map, you would see that despite the fact that a state like Rajasthan is known as a swing state, you know, it goes and up, reverse, you know, majorities pretty much every time, there is a great permanence of caste-based representation, which is the same, by the way, for Karnataka. Look at a caste map of 2013 and a caste map of 2013. It's a, you know, spot the difference kind of game. It's literally the same map. You remember I showed that in Hyderabad earlier on this year. And so in bipolar context, or bipartisan context, parties basically adopt the same strategy of co-opting members of locally dominant groups. And those groups may vary, obviously, from one constituency to another. But it leads to the formation of party organizations that is really fairly homogeneous or fairly undifferentiated. And that's also reinforced by the informal rules of the game, where money plays a very important role, where muscle plays an important role, where the cost of entry in politics is so high that it favors only the elite segment of those dominant groups, right? Which, in the case of many of those states, has actually fueled a lot of, you know, protest movement within dominant groups. This class rift that has been growing, it has actually been among the Jats, the Patels, the Marathas, and so forth, and that has been fueled by this, you know, intersectional form of elitism of political parties, and both of Congress and BJP.
Sarayu, I was struck by how important religion was in what you mentioned, both about Telangana and Kerala. You know, instead of saying the left hadn't addressed religion, I think we do them a disservice in not seeing how they actually manage religion very well. In the sense, you have three major communities: Christians, Muslims, Hindus. None of them feeling like they're a minority, and it can't just be a default sort of accidental sort of occurrence. And if you remember the Shabarimala temple, the rationalists had constantly attacked the communists for not being rational enough in curbing so many superstitious practices around the Shabarimala all these years. And their accusation was, it is a money spinner, the left is hypocritical, if it's rational it should say no to the, you know, the flame that people say they see, etc., etc. So I wonder what you think about, you know, how, I don't think BJP is addressing religion in a particular way, but it was always addressed in different ways. And the curious fact about the regional parties of the South is that none of them can be labeled anti-Hindu. And it can take the form of, you know, KCR doing large-scale yagnas, or the Janata Dal family paying temple visits routinely. So they don't have to, they're not anxious about being suspected for their Hindu, you know, whatever commitment. So their welfarism just, you know, happens that way. I don't think there's an explicit religiosity being infused to any particular policy. It's a sense of security about being who they are. I don't know if you...
Yes, a couple of thoughts that, couple of thoughts that arise in that context. I think in Kerala, one of the interesting things has been the use of religion by parties like the UDF, which is basically the Congress, and Shashi Tharoor, which is the sort of moderate Hindutva, as they call them, as he calls it, where it relies both on denying that religion or should be something, so religion is a private matter or something that should be, it really goes to the root of the feelings that people have, while at the same time wanting to build mobilization around it, which I think has been in some ways, it co-opts both the strategies of the left, which has been to treat religions equally or differently without getting expressly into contesting even some of the more problematic aspects of religion, while relying on the right's approach to religion, which is to focus or emphasize the Hindu identity. And so I think, I wonder if a part of the answer to the question of using religion as a way to mobilize is in the rise of this moderate or intermediate form of using religion, which co-opts the strategies of both sides into articulating a Hindu identity. And I think Gilles also has something, but that's one. The other point around whether political parties in the South have been anti-Hindu, and to that extent, yes, perhaps not. Even the DMK, which has its claims of being a rationalist party, there are sort of conversations around how there is a temple within the DMK house, and sort of all of those aspects of how the DMK uses religion to reach out to its voter base. So I don't know if there can be a division. What is interesting though is, and to some extent yes, but I think what has also happened in the context of Telangana, and why I brought it up specifically, is the combination of all of these within the frame of a regional identity in a revenue surplus state. So not only were these issues used to mobilize voters, they were used to create and foster a regional identity of Telangana in the context of a new state. So it's three things. And yet, if you notice very interestingly, the TRS has been able to co-opt the All India AIMIM within its fold. So that's something that has happened despite the overt performative Hinduism of KCR. And the AIMIM is a significant force at the state level in the context of Telangana. So I would see this as something that exemplifies this bridge that political parties in the South have been able to cross. But A, the context of a revenue surplus state, B, post-split identity formation at the state level, and then C, the co-option of the Muslim party in Hyderabad, which is AIMIM, into the fold of TRS. So I don't know if that answers the question.
No, I completely agree with you, and this combination of welfareism and partly instrumental use of religiosity also, which actually quite conveniently also helps to neutralize the BJP discourse, a form of religious assertion that is not perceived as threatening by minorities is extremely interesting. I would add a third dimension, which I think is very important in states, particularly in the south, such as Telangana, Andhra, and including Karnataka, is also crony capitalism. Because you have a regime which, in a way, have access to vast resources from corporate origins or from private sector origin, which enables them to, in a way, perform on the welfare aspect without embezzling too much fund and without interfering with the functioning of the welfare states and being able to deliver. Telangana is the state that spends the most on welfare. Precisely because they find sources of funding, in private sector, land transaction, construction, mining, etc., other natural resources, and so forth. It's worth remembering that some of the richest politicians and the politicians who also have enriched themselves personally the most and the fastest in terms of volume and in terms of growth rate also are mostly in the south. And they're not to be found in UP or Bihar, where political parties, political actors, because of the absence of a structured, strong, independent private sector, are basically left with only the public sector to plunder.
Rahul, I had three quick questions for you. You talked about the mandalization of the BJP. Now, what about the big excluded religious communities, the Muslims and the Christians? How is the party faring vis-a-vis bringing them into the fold, even when it not really care, or it might begin to care, we don't know. The second thing is the Congress is secular, so are the regional parties. So if it's trying to get back its space from them, the means available for differentiating yourself from them seem to be limited. I wonder if you've thought about how, or if you know what the Congress is thinking about this. And I wonder if you gave up on the left a little too quickly. I mean, might they still do something to reinvent themselves? I wonder.
Three quick questions, three quick answers. I think BJP is very clear about its politics. You may desire that they should be more inclusive of other religious group, but that's not its ideological project. It's there to win election, and it is clear about its ideological project. It may talk something on the television channel and whenever they come to institutions like these, but clarity of the project, even in Northeast, is very, very clear. So on that front, they get like some 6 to 8% votes from Muslim communities, which happens, like, you may think that there is no Muslim in the country who may vote for the BJP, but this number is not, in a way, very different from what happens in other parts of the world, right? So Republican Party openly says things against African Americans, but consistently in American National Election Studies, we've seen 6 to 8% African Americans to vote for Republicans. So similar, like, there are pockets, there is a pattern of which Muslims are more likely to vote for the BJP, or Christians are likely to vote for the BJP. So, but that number is in the single digits, and I don't think BJP is making any efforts to be inclusive on that front. The second one is, I think Rahul Gandhi's interview in The Hindu is very, very clear where Congress is moving. So I think they are moving away from the secularism question. Both in terms of, I think they are not making, so 5 years ago when you had many people like Harsh Mandir advising Congress party, the party's position was very, very different on the question of Muslim minorities and other things. Congress knows this is a trap, and I hope they know. And so in both in terms of so it's bad for our democracy, bad for representative democracy, bad for Muslims, but parties are in the game to win elections. So I think Congress has understood, at least will make noise on other things, be a little silent on these questions for some time. So the discussion, that interview was very, very revealing, which appeared 3 days back in Hindu. The third question on the left, and I have a very critical take on that, for many reasons. I think India is and was a fertile ground for the politics of left, right? Is it a country which is so poor, where so much illiteracy, where so much hierarchy, where so much exploitation? I think it was a fertile ground for, but left as an electoral force was never a pan-India force. So left in Delhi, in JNU and universities is very, very different from what the left is in Kerala and the left in Bengal, right? Left parties in Kerala do not receive, the larger portion of Christian and Muslim vote goes to Congress party, whereas in Kerala, left is primarily a Hindu party. And similarly in West Bengal, they managed to infiltrate the party organization through Durga Puja Pandal committees. So they used religion wherever they could to sort of so the reason why left is going down, because it is going down in West Bengal, right? If you lose 42, if you're not going to be a force in, so you were a force in 20 plus 42 plus 2, 64 seats, right? If out of those 64 seats, 42 goes away, it's very much possible that they might not win a single seat in West Bengal. So if you are virtually contesting in 20 seats, then...
Ideological reinvention, precisely. I mean, to get back to the soil as it
See, for ideological unless you have a political project and political power, right? Like, so the reason, so I've written about this, and I think because I take left, like for last 50, 70 years, left was practicing a politics which was not like, it was not fertile for mobilization, right? It is like, these questions should be researched, that the biggest, so left politics relied on, across the world, relied on trade unions as an organization. In India, the biggest trade union organization is a right-wing organization, right? It's a tragedy, right? Left in the Europe used the religion to sort of like mobilize on the class axis. Sorry? Yeah. Here, like, they forgot to sort of like intermix the religion and caste and class to create a, like, in left, what is known as, after every Congress, they have a line, right? Strategic, some line, they say like, this is the line we will follow. So I think the line which the Communist Party has taken in India has sort of like been wrong, and I think like now they don't know what to do, like what to do in West Bengal. Like, should they align with Congress Party? They are going to face challenges even there. So like, it may revive, but then things in long future, who knows?
More than half an hour questions. Thank you. There's a mic.
Thank you. Thanks for this great talk, but my question is not substantively related to the elections per se, but one element of elections. So prior, after elections, before the results are out, we see a spate of polls. I'm not talking about exit polls, pre-polls, post-polls. I don't want to know about the value of these polls, but my larger question is, since all of you work with data in different ways, how would you evaluate these polls?
Hello. My question is specific from Tamil Nadu perspective. So in Tamil Nadu, elections are happening for assembly constituencies also, like 18 assembly constituencies. So the outcome of this may affect the present state government or not, something about it. And one more thing, you talked about the convergence of different identities into a Dravidian identity. I think Dravidian identity is losing its relevance now. Because the last party, DMDK, was named after a Dravidian name, but after that Nam Tamilar Katchi, it came up, it is showing a new identity called Tamilan identity. So, and it is also gaining traction, that's what I can see. And Kamal Hassan's party or Rajini's party, whichever is going to come, they are projecting something else, which is totally different from Dravidian identity. So something about that, thanks.
I think even in this talk, in this panel discussion, disturbingly, we are still operating with the phraseology of the rise of BJP. I would agree with the wisdom, and I'm not a statistician. You guys have done a wonderful work with data and perceptions and all. But with whatever learning that I had from literature, if I can say, pre-2002, the rise of BJP is something that is a phrase that we should work with. Post-2002, the rise of Moditwa and the rise of Modi. If you don't want to move away with Hindutva as a analytical category and replace Hindutva with Moditwa, the rise of Modi, the rise of personality. And why I am saying that? The same political party that puts Advani as a prime ministerial candidate puts stand-up comedian against that patriarch of the political party. And who has led the rise of BJP? But Vajpayee and Advani. So is it even an ideological project? Second thing, this guy who comes to power in 2014, before that in 2012, immediately after the election results are announced in Baroda, Modi, 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 and Modi for PM, all those slogans. He might have engineered it himself. There might not be spontaneity about many things that we see amongst the crowd who is shouting this chants Modi. Now, 2012 12 onwards that project starts, even in terms of demanding him as a PM. And what is he doing while he's doing the campaign, while he's running for prime ministership? He says, I want India to be free of Congress. And what is his own backyard? 2001, he comes as a night watchman in Gujarat politics of BJP. From 2001 to 2012, what is happening to Gujarat BJP now? Gujarat BJP is full of ex-Congress MLAs. Power seekers, as some panelists put it.
I'll take the question of polling, and then I'm sure Rahul will complement, because he's actually the one who's worked with polls. I actually don't do polling. But I mean, something I've learned from his guru, actually, from Pradeep Chiba, and I mean the way he formulated, in an interesting way, is that the problem with polling in India is that we don't have a theory of voting to sustain it. And so if you assume that, the poll is made with a sufficient amount of integrity and methodological soundness, you can arrive at a snapshot vision of what has happened. And we know that post-poll has more accuracy than, pre-poll. But the problem is that you're still stuck with, eventually explaining something that has just happened, and that's about it. Because basically, what we see that at the ground level, and Pradeep and Francesca have doing really, really pioneering work on that right now, is that at the most granular level, you see tremendous amount of volatility in electoral behavior, which would indicate that you cannot connect predictable electoral behavior to particular sociological attributes. And when you think, and I teach a lot of classes on caste and politics, and I usually, very often, after all, I'm the disciple of Jacques Fallot, so I'm bound to, do that forever and ever. But something that I keep reminding, my audiences is that caste politics is, and those issues of alignments with caste voting, alignment with parties and so forth, it's a game of few and not of many. Because most voters, most citizens, belong to groups that are either too poor, too small, or too geographically dispersed, or a combination of the three, to matter politically, right? And so their electoral behavior has to be determined by, a range of other, factors than simply alignment of identity and interest, the kind of patronage identity combination that Kanchan Chandra speaks in her book, right? So things are necessarily far more complicated. And that's also why, because this volatility of electoral behavior is a defining feature, or seems to be a defining feature of electoral behavior in India, you cannot build predictive models. So we don't have the data in the first place to do that. And even if we had the data, it would not lead to effective, predictability, which I think is a good thing. Uncertainty of outcome is a feature of, healthy democracy. If you can figure out some formula that, what is going to happen, it's actually bad news. I would rather have an uncertain competitive system where everyone is kept on their toes, rather than a system where, political hacks, or worse, people like us can actually, predict accurately electoral outcomes.
Oh, on polling, okay. So you know more than me on this, why you're asking these questions? So one, I agree with Gilles, the large point. But so after Karnataka Assembly elections in 2018, I wrote a long open letter to pollsters, which started with something like, "Dear friends, I'm one of you." And I feel your nervousness. So the polls are basically just being used for the purpose of forecasting, right? Or at best, after election, explaining the outcome. So those are the only two things. Even like the CSDS polls, the larger utility of CSDS polls is basically in explaining electoral outcome of that particular election. So one, we don't have a theory of vote, which is, I'm like, okay, we don't have it, but like, how do we even create that theory of vote? For that theory of vote, there has to be a lot of research happening on electoral and voting behavior across political science departments in India, right? How many departments in India have people who can teach polling, survey research, use that data, and ask people to write papers using those electoral data? So unless those smaller theories are created in different universities, which can be then sort of like mapped onto and like say something bigger about Indian party politics and what is happening. So until then, I think these polls would be largely used for the purposes of what they are used for. And that divide between like some, I think like Gopal Guru wrote a very like provocative paper, right? Empirical Shudra, theoretical Brahmins. Unless that bogus divide between quantitative and qualitative is not there, right? Like it's a bogus divide. As if like doing data work is cool or doing field work or ethnography is much more rigorous. Both are rigorous, right? Like for both you to. So any good research should have both the elements, and which method is primary should be determined by the question you are asking. Unless those things change, not much is going to happen in various departments, and so we will be basically talking the same thing in next election as well. Sad.
Yes, I mean, I had a point about polls as well, but maybe the question around Tamil Nadu. Yes, so around the issue of the assembly elections being held at the same time, this is definitely something that in states where the elections happen simultaneously, and I guess in some ways speaking to the debate around simultaneous elections, they are likely to have an impact on each other. And in fact, to say that it's just a question of timing, I don't know if it's right, because even in states where elections happened recently, like say Chhattisgarh, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, or say Karnataka in some ways, the outcome of the election, the sort of broader political issues and the performance of the government are always always in some ways a part of the referendum in the election. So I don't know if that answers your question, but some of the issues on how the AIADMK has performed at the state level is going to be relevant in thinking about how people are going to vote for at the assembly, at the Lok Sabha level. Around the issue of Dravidian politics itself and the sort of decreasing traction around the Dravidian identity as a whole, that is indeed true. And particularly some of these newer forms of mobilizations, like I find the Kamal Hassan party the most interesting in some ways, because that is a political party where I think he and his party they're contesting a few seats, which is a mobilization based on a regional identity, but on also broader, newer issues such as youth, young people, and those kinds of issues. This, in some ways, may be, at least in the context of this election, capture the dissent with the AIADMK that cannot go towards the DMK, and may reflect, at least in cities like in urban areas, may capture those voters who are disenchanted with the AIADMK for a range of reasons, including the alliance with the BJP or whatever else performance, which definitely is something to raise questions about, but find themselves for ideological reasons, caste reasons, or sort of corruption issues, vote for the DMK. So that is on that party. On the question of the Dravidian identity more broadly, I think it is instructive to read the work of Hugo Gorange and Karthikeyan Damodaran and Andrew Wyatt and everybody, who are not just speaking of the dynamics of the Dravidian movement and how it was built up primarily on intermediate caste identities, but also in the problematic ways it erased the Dalit identity. And I wonder if some of those articulations are now apolitical, but are articulating themselves not purely in caste terms, but also in issue terms, such as jobs. So that again is something to think about. I have to make this comment about polls. I'm sorry, I can't resist. But I think in addition to sort of some of the questions you all raised about how do you integrate research at the ground level into the question or the theory that you have around polling, there's also the process of how polls are conducted themselves. And to me, that raises two questions. One is the politics of making lists, which is an everyday political practice that is ongoing. Like, who gets on the lists? Because when you do your polling, as far as I understand it, you're looking to randomize on the basis of lists, right? But your list making process, yeah, so you pull names at random from electoral rolls, am I right?
So some polls are done on the basis of electoral rolls. You can also do polls without
Household.
using the electoral rolls.
Yes, so the polls that use electoral rolls, that process is fairly intermediated by lower level political functionaries who decide who gets on the vote, who gets on the electoral roll, whose forms are submitted, whose forms are not. So while we might believe in the shiny new technocratic process of you file your form online, that is actually on the ground fairly done by local political intermediaries. So the role they play is fairly uneven and not, I would imagine, terribly well understood. So I think that is something that distorts or refracts how we should think about the polling process itself in India. The second question is the process of polling itself. Your pollster is usually an educated elite, most likely a male, going out into the field, upper caste, sorry? Yes?
On both, this is a debate we can take quite long.
Yeah.
We are university faculties. In some ways, we all are elites, right? So then do we, it's basically the whole debate of whether you are experienced enough to talk about a community or not. So
No, of course, no. My problem is more that it might raise issues of what do you consider as the right answer that you want to give. So there is this social desirability bias that operates, which not just to the question of who am I going to vote for, the answer to that question, but even answers to social questions like did you receive money, or have you received goods, have you received welfare. So these are all questions that are asked as a part of different polls in different ways, to which you might choose to give an answer that you consider is desirable for the pollster. So that is something that, again, I don't know the extent to which it operates, and I don't think we know enough about it. So again, something to think about, and I think, yeah. And then about the rise of the BJP also I have something to say, but, yeah? Yes, Modi.
Okay, hard question.
It's on.
Hello? So the question was, why don't we call it Rise of Modi? Is that the bottom line of the question?
And is it an ideological project anymore?
So leaders and parties in India are tied together. They are not separate for all political parties. There is no AIDMK without Jayalalitha. There is no BSP without Mayawati. There is no RJD without Lalu Yadav. If Lalu Yadav, Mayawati, in some terms, symbolize certain ideological project, so does BJP and Modi. Some of us who study long terrain of politics, for us, leaders are very, very important. But without the organizations or the ideological project, leader alone cannot make things happen, right? Modi was of course, in 2013, 2014, Modi is present there to take advantage of something that was larger unfolding. If Modi was the prime ministerial candidate in 2009, I think he would have lost the election, right? There was a lot of other things happening in the political system where Modi was fortunate enough to be present and take advantage of the situation and mobilize. So leaders are there to win elections, right? And they are ruthless in some ways, but they are also in other ways deeply ideological about. So I don't think when you talk about pragmatism and ruthlessness and ideology as if these are mutually exclusive categories, right? You have to be you can't be just ideological and not be pragmatic, right? You have to have both the element. So you can define 2014 as the rise of Modi, and I think I did in some ways brought that thing. that the contradictions that are developing within BJP remains under the guard because a charismatic leader like Modi is present. Once he goes away, these would unravel like anything. So I am not denying that the rise is largely is due to Modi. In fact, I also said that BJP is not contesting this election. Modi is contesting this election on the behalf of BJP. So I recognize the importance of Modi for BJP's rise post-2014. But Modi would not have been what he is without the organizational backing he has. That's the limited point I would make.
And to add to that, is also sort of the whole range of literature which talks about some of the instrumental reasons as to why the BJP has risen, right? The use of education as a service strategy in rural Chhattisgarh. Tribal communities vote disproportionately more for the BJP. And there's Tariq Tachil's work and book which talks about how through the use of Ekal schools, which are single village schools, single teacher schools, the BJP has, not the BJP itself, but the affiliates, that's the Vanvasi Kalyan Ashram, has used these kind of service strategies to earn votes. If I may, for a moment, plug my own work as well. The rise of the BJP as well in urban areas. The BJP has done very well in the peripheries of Bangalore. And part of that has not just been elite voters who have voted for the BJP, but also the BJP going out in the city very instrumentally to recruit voters from migrant communities who are enrolled through the promise of housing and through a project of religiosity. So they've given money for temples among certain communities, and then they use this region as a strategy to integrate voters from different communities but belonging to the state, same state. So Odia voters, BJP has an association for Odia voters in Bangalore, which is again another explanation for the rise of the BJP, which all creates, as Rahul said, the fertile ground for a leader to come and capture it. So the actuation of, or sort of the traction that Modi as an individual has got has been built on multiple coexisting factors that have been built up over a period of time through strategy, through seva. There is in fact research that shows that the BJP has used affiliate organizations in Karnataka better than it does in Tamil Nadu. And all of these are coexisting realities which allow somebody like Modi to come and capture it.
Yeah, and just to add one last point on this, is there's a whole cottage industry of political commentary on the so-called tensions between RSS and Modi and the difference of styles. And the fact remains that ideologically speaking, and there's obviously a large part of that commentary is wishful thinking that somewhat those tensions may one day end up into preferably in amicable form of divorce. But the fact is that ideologically the alignment has been complete and perfect from the day Narendra Modi joined the RSS. And there hasn't been a deviation for that. The transformations have taken place within the BJP as an organization, but the ideological base has been remarkably unchanging for close to 100 years. I can't think of many other examples of ideology-based political movement or organization that has been so unchanging, since its in foundations. I mean, I just can't think of an equivalent or an example, and that element has, remains very, very strong today, even today.
We only have 10 minutes. We'll just take a few questions, and then we'll have.
So, hello.
So I'm going to cheat a little and ask 2 questions instead.
Very brief, concise.
Yeah, the first one being is the fact that you see Congress, abandoning any garb of sophistry and sensitivity, and practicing overtly Hindutva politics. You see Rahul Gandhi visiting a temple in Wayanad, you see him going to the temple in Udupi, and things like that. Does that mean secularism doesn't have any space in Indian politics? Is that the demise of secularism? The second thing, again, you see Congress adopting very popular left policies, Nyay being one of them, and the fiscal prudence of which is questionable, so to speak, in the long run. So what about center politics in that context? What happens to it?
My question is to Rahul sir, as you love to do predictions. So you said that NDA will not get the mark which is supposed to it get. So if NDA is unable to get the mark, and last time when BJP was to choose between Advani and Vajpayee, they choose Vajpayee over Advani. So if this time this comes into the picture, and there was Nitin Gadkari's name flaunting for 2-3 days at the time when the elections dates were going to be released. So how do you look at this?
I had a question. It's more about, should we be also worried about how we do not have a strong opposition when this is coming from a place where everybody is anti-Modi and there's some sort of force against, say, BJP, but shouldn't we be also worried about a lack of a strong opposition?
So how do you see the move of Congress with leaders like Rahul Gandhi moving away from their strong Hindu build and coming to constituencies like Wayanad? And how do Congress see this competition majorly as fighting against Modi or fighting against the BJP ideology? And one last thing, sir. You had earlier pointed out the liberal part, the youth and the ideology of the BJP. But we have seen in states like Karnataka, where BJP has been able to mobilize the urban areas and gain the votes in the urban areas compared to where we have seen Congress being more towards the rural parts.
Hi, I just wanted to ask a question. If you see KCR is very positively moving towards the third front, and how can we see the regional parties are going to play a major role in if there is so-called third front going to be formed?
Last opportunity for questions.
So since I have the mic, I'll cherry pick the questions. On this, I mean, I wouldn't have an issue with the Congress visiting temple or Rahul Gandhi visiting temple if he was visiting, churches and mosques as well. And this idea of soft Hindutva, I've written about that. I think is fundamentally, self-defeating. Because if you try to address yourself to segments of the electorate that are mobilized by religious tropes, they're always going to go for the original rather than the copy. And unless you become worse than the original, which, I mean, but that still seems pretty unlikely to happen. What is striking is that, I mean, you could also stand for a form of principled politics that does not need to name any particular community, right? But they're not doing that either. And they've basically fallen probably, I mean, for a long time, in the trap where, secularism has been associated or equated with, appeasement or accommodation of minorities. Both terms having become, interchangeable. But there's no, fight or struggle to basically reclaim, the definition of secularism, which, goes back to the origin of what it was supposed to mean, to mean a form of, benevolent neutrality. I mean, whatever you want to call it that way. On the role of regional parties, I mean, what excites me the most in this election is the prospect of seeing a bunch of those mostly South Indian regional parties non-aligned, coming together as a bloc and voicing their demands vis-a-vis whoever, I mean, more likely the BJP, but whoever might be in a position to claim state government formation at the first place. So this idea that KCR and Jagan and Navin Patnaik and maybe Mamta Banerjee, even though she's been more mercurial about Third Front, might just combine their strength and, hey, look, we are a block of, 60 MPs and you cannot do anything without us. I'm really interested to see how that is going to unfold. Now, I don't know who had that formulation first, but the Third Front has never been a Third Front. It's rather been, a third space of electoral politics. And the composition of that space and alignments and non-alignments have been totally fluctuating. Zoya Hassan, wrote, among many others, wrote that political parties in India are best, defined by opportunism and pragmatism. It's true, for third front politics as well. And speaking of religiosity and regional parties, I was told that Mr. Devegowda is 100% convinced that he's going to be the prime minister because his astrologer has told him so.
Sorry, I'm also going to cherry pick questions. I think I'm going to try and answer the question around the opposition. I don't know who brought it up, but the declining or vanishing opposition. I think one context where it's most visible is Telangana, where through a process of co-option and coercion and sort of a range of strategies, there's pretty much no opposition in Telangana. The interesting thing that might result, especially given the most recent mobilization around the formation of the state itself, and I wonder if this is instructive in thinking about oppositions more broadly, is whether opposition might therefore move to the social. So if it does not find political voice for either the way in which first past the post systems work, or do not find any articulation politically for, I don't know, arithmetic, something like that, it might move to social forms of articulation, which means protest, dissent, and I don't know what else. I think that is something definitely to be thoughtful about as to what really opposition means, what really political opposition means in the context of how we are in a system where there is one party around which political narratives are framed.
Sorry. Okay, all the questions. So quick answers. Thank you for these questions. Many of these questions are really good, and I'm very happy with the way you all have engaged with Gilles, Sarayu, and me. As Gilles mentioned about RSS and Modi tensions as a cottage industry, same is with Nitin Gadkari, Sushma Swaraj, Arun Jaitley. See, forecast is a serious business in a way. Some people do it seriously, right? So if you basically, given all the numbers and what pre-polls are suggesting, it seems like NDA would be in a striking distance of majority, right? If NDA is in striking distance of majority, then there would be no change of guard. By striking distance of majority means it's 15-20 seats. They will easily manage to get that. If BJP is below 200 and NDA is around 230, then they need a lot of things, and in that scenario, this name of Nitin Gadkari and others have propped up. In my opinion, and when you make a forecast, there is always a probability associated. I'm not saying something which will happen. I'm saying there is a probability of this happening higher. So in my opinion, in my forecast, a Modi minus NDA government is very, very low probability. Either there would be Modi or no. So good or bad, this is what seems to be happening. On the question of Congress party, secularism and Nyay, think hard about which secularism are you talking about, right? Is Congress party losing the principle of secularism espoused by Nehru or in that period? Or is Congress party losing the secularism which is basically meeting on the day of iftars and having some biryanis, right? So I don't know which one of these is, right? So I think that whatever Congress does, especially by not allocating enough tickets to Muslims and not making them, say, ministers, this is going to be bad for democracy, right? For a representative democracy, there's no doubt about it. But Congress, I think, is becoming a little bit Machiavellian. It understands the current climate and probably it cannot play that card anymore. So I think for a moment, that's the route it is going to take. And it will also think of politics as a sequential game. As soon as this space will be sort of vacated, Congress takes some other mantle, there would be space created for another political player, right? Because this issue is not going to go anywhere. So there could be a new player coming up using this issue and mobilizing. Like KCR was part of TDP. Suddenly, Telangana movement has been happening from 1950s, right? Suddenly, a political player jumps on the issue, YSR dies. So, crisis always presents opportunities for political players to make their moves. That's the Machiavellian politics, and that's how it happens, right? But like, on the Nyay, I don't know, like, I think serious economists from MIT and others have contributed to this scheme. They must have thought about the, see, I think given the, like, so on a serious note, we do need a welfare architecture in our country. The kind of poverty and distress people are in, there may be a question of fiscal prudence, but the same issue was being raised for NREGA and other schemes. I think we can generate enough resources, if not Nyay, something like Nyay to help large masses. The sad part about Nyay or any other thing is it is moved at the time of election, right? If Congress party was serious about it, like they should have been doing everything. So the reason why many of these things are getting boomerang, because they suddenly like wake up in March, right? They were not doing things even between December and March. There was a momentum in their favor after winning those 3 elections, and then they waited for things to happen. Modi kept on doing things. They announced some scheme, 6,000 rupees. They announced something for the economically backward reservation. Then, so Congress basically lost the momentum it had in like post 2018 assembly election, and then in March, Nyay and Priyanka Gandhi and everything. So too many things, but too late. Like Congress going to temples and other things, I agree with. I think like it's politics. People do all kinds of things, so that's okay. See, this is not a new thing that Congress, like Rahul Gandhi has moved to Wayanad and contesting election, right? Sometimes it's basically very pure pragmatic instinct that Amethi might be in danger, why not contest in Wayanad? A person like Modi, you may not agree, like I don't think Modi's seat in Gujarat in 2014 was in danger, but contesting from Varanasi was for a symbolic message for other things, right? And so politicians, so Indira Gandhi also contested from Chikmagalur, and so these things happen in politics, right? Like there are pragmatic decisions leaders and politicians take. Congress must have thought about a strategy why they are feeling from Wayanad. On the question of youth, so I'm not saying youth is not voting for the BJP. See, every voter, like when they're going to vote, they are facing multiple issues, right? So Modi's promise of hope, jobs, everything in 2014 sort of subsided what BJP stands on the question of liberal social norms. But if Modi fails to deliver on all those parameters and they continue to press on illiberal social norms, one day youth will think that they don't do what I wanted and they are taking away my liberty also, right? So then other things will become important.
Last one question to the panelists actually. Somehow in these discussions of elections as comparative politics, there is some sense of assuredness at bottom that the electoral system itself will continue to be a fine space that will let people maneuver around up within limits and get power and lose power, etc. But the last, the Amit Shah style of management has, I think out to make us think about how much that electoral system itself can be injured, and without hopes of self-corrections coming or within sight. I mean, have you thought about this in terms of, as students of elections? I mean, what is the damage that you've observed, or do you see healing, or the electoral bonds matter? And the way in which the various, you can say the Congress has also done similar things in the past, and then see them as deviations that won't remain, or that could be overcome at some point. Or you could see that there is a new kind of electioneering intensity that has actually done a new kind of damage. Just as far as campaigning goes, you just look at the fake news campaign, for example. I mean, we see the Congress candidates are rarely, making claims about themselves while also saying the other guy has been terrible in so many ways. I mean, I don't see the maligning social sort of media videos that I saw were mostly of the non-BJP people. I'm not saying these parties aren't indulging any of it. They may do it in smaller ways, but I think there is a commitment to deviating from the norms with a certain cavalierness that I don't know if it has an effect.
Let me make some quick points, and then perhaps Gilles and Sarayu can add to this. I think like all electoral systems produce certain positive things and negative things, right? And they go side by side. So for example, as the elections became competitive, it became more participatory, right? So it got there was a democratic upsurge, people from the poorer sections started participating more. In this new electoral system, we're also going to see more participation of women as voters, right? So there are certain, all electoral, and I can sort of go on counting about the positive things. Because electoral system was fragmented and permissive, it led to participation of many political parties representing very narrow sectional interest, which is bad for development and in some senses, but it is good for democracy in other senses because everyone has a chance to become a political elite, right? So those are, now, if elections are going to become competitive, campaigning every time will create new mediums, and those mediums would be sort of so fake news propaganda is as old as this civilization, like Hitler having propaganda ministry, doing all kind of things. So it's not new. I think what is new that every medium which is coming up, technological innovation, it is much faster and has a much wider reach, right? So it's not as if there was a centralized coordinated campaign which is happening for the first time, when we were young kids, phone aata tha, main Vajpayee bol raha hu, right? So that was a medium of campaigning through phones. 2009 saw receiving messages every minute from political parties. 2016 onwards, we see now you are part of WhatsApp groups you don't want to be part of. And then, of course, the way WhatsApp is being used in India is very different from what I think those who were designing these chat sites had not thought about it. No, seriously, there is a whole, in fact, many of these tech companies had to change their whole model based on how it was being used outside the developed world. It was in the developing countries like India where voice messages on WhatsApp became very important. The reason, because Indians can't type in English and Hindi, right? More people in developing countries have not read, are in some ways have not been in school. So voice became very important. They started talking in video messaging. So that's why sometimes market shape how companies are going to perform and change and other things. Some were able to adapt to this. Like WhatsApp, it grew. Viber was not able to adapt. It's over. So, but yeah, fake news is an important question.
I was surprised that question didn't come up earlier, to be very honest. I wonder if in some ways, I started my fieldwork in 2014, and in some ways, between then and now is when we've seen an explosion. It started in 2014 with WhatsApp in its earliest stages, where you would receive videos and some kinds of political information. But the systematic way in which WhatsApp is just one example, but sort of forms of social media have been appropriated and then delegated to be used to fulfill the aims of political parties is something that that has only been increasing, and we are seeing a lot of. So there are many ways in which it's used, either to channel information to specific groups. So data and sort of the information that you have about who's receiving this information allows you to channel your information to your relevant caste group or to the relevant people who might be interested in this kind of message. And I think one of the interests is not much of an offline campaign anymore. So you don't see politicians campaigning as much as you used to, perhaps. And there are also sort of, it has spawned social media only political campaigners. So there's a candidate in South Bangalore whose messages I constantly receive, called Manohar Iyer, who has, I don't know if he's ever stepped out of his house, right? So you only see messages on WhatsApp. I mean, I might be sort of part representing the truth, but the new forms of mobilization have allowed for such candidates to exist. And also a valid question then becomes, do political parties have to make contact with the voters at all? So that's kind of one question that emerges. The second, which I thought I brought up a little bit in the context of the DMK, is the way in which the ground level political functionary is directly able to speak to the highest level of the political functionary. So there was, or there continues to be in some parties, an intermediate group of politicians who are now completely irrelevant, right? Who were the ones that would aggregate information as to what issues were relevant, take them up to the political party, and then sort of be responsible. So that intermediary role is something that has been subsumed in this broader conversation around data. The third sort of, or data, fake news, misinformation, etc. The third, and I wonder if this is the most troubling thing around the changing dimensions of electoral politics, is this kind of cleavage between elections and everyday politics or your political relationships that are in existence between elections. And I don't know how to parse this and think about it, and I think this is something that we really need to investigate. Because if your election and your electoral information in some contexts is coming to you on one form of media, which is not the way in which you engage with your local politician between elections to get your voter or your welfare or to get your identity card, that might raise some questions about sort of the whole system as a whole. So I think these are all things to think about, and I think these are significant areas of research, not just from the perspective of what is the electoral outcome going to be and who is using social media better and who is spreading more fake news, which is one sort of narrative capture that is occurring, but also in terms of what it is doing to our polity as a whole.
So I have 5 remarks or 5 points to make to address the question / concern that you just raised, and to complement what has been just said. I mean, social media campaign, there's just so much focus on them. I really would like people to remember that these are a supplementary form of political mobilization that has not substituted itself to traditional forms. You have about 300 million WhatsApp users in India, about 350 million Facebook users. That still leaves 600 million voters who are not on WhatsApp. So, and those somehow have not been forgotten by political parties. It would be silly to think that they would forget all those voters. And so a party like the BSP is continuously underestimated because it has a more stealthy way of doing mobilization, door-to-door, Dalit bastis, personal networks, long embedded organizations that don't need to make a lot of noise to reach out to a lot of people locally. Mayawati has never done a lot of rallies, and her rallies are most of the time extremely boring because she lectures and no, it's true. She just, she reads, and it's, let me tell you the history, going back to Ambedkar, going back to, Maharaj, and these are the most quiet, silent form of rallies because people actually listen, contrary to most others where everybody shouts, including the person who's actually delivering the speech. And so don't think that, those traditional forms of mobilization have disappeared. The second observation I make, since 2013-14, and since, of course, the victory in 2014, the BJP has been fighting elections with a kind of rage that I don't remember having seen a lot. And by rage, I mean determination, energy, and not just to win a majority, but crush the adversary, remove them, replace them, and that that I have not seen in Indian politics. I can't remember, and I'm not that old, but and you see them fighting every election as if the next general elections dependent from it, including municipal election. The last municipal election in Delhi, they spent an inordinate amount of money that no one would normally spend in a municipal election, particularly in Delhi where the municipality doesn't matter so much, right? And so there's something to reflect about, what's the driver, what's the motivation, why just defeating the adversary is not enough, you really want to crush them. A third observation is that over a longer period of time, the more participatory, inclusive elections have become, the lesser and lesser democratic political parties have become at the same time. So the more inclusion you had in the electorate, women, lower caste, and so forth, and higher participation of minorities, at the same time, political parties transform themselves into lesser and lesser democratic. And I don't want to romanticize the democratic character of the Congress under Nehru, obviously not. But I mean, I've written an article on the transformation of the Samajwadi Party, which used to be a party that stood for farmers, for something that vaguely resembled socialism, for secularism. They took action, they actually they went underground, they took risks, and they gradually converted into basically a criminalized and crony family holding that serves the interests of a particular family. And it's been the case for many, many other parties. And all those regional leaders are, most of them, complete autocrat within their own organization, and it's reflected in terms of, sort of quality of democratic governance. I mean, I'm not going to give you a long lecture on that, but this idea that a healthy electoral democracy, competitive, free and fair election, peaceful transition of power does not translate automatically into democratic governance. That is, government that once elected adhere to have a sense of self-restraint, have a sense that, there ought to be limits to what we can do. Determining what people should eat, what they should think, what they should not think, what they're allowed to say, not say, etc., etc. The fourth point is we may focus, again, to go back on the social media space, we may focus on the exchange of invectives and the poor quality of public discourse. In a way, it's still better than old forms of acrimonies that did not take place on a virtual space, but in a real space, where people would actually club each other's faces. More than 100 people died in electoral-related violence in the 1991 election. It took the incession, the policing of election, etc., to put this a little bit into order somewhat. But in states like West Bengal, there's tremendous amount of political violence during and between elections, between party workers. In Kerala also, interestingly, where the left has declined the most, there has been, the most violence. And the last point I'd make is something that worries me greatly and more, and I concur with the piece that Jürgen Dreyer very recently published about the Election Commission and the crisis of trust, because I think we can talk now about a crisis of trust, not just like a small trust deficit, but it's a crisis of trust, and the inability of the Election Commission to rein in all manners of violations of the Model Code of Conduct, and inability of the Election Commissions to control in any way whatsoever political funding at the party level. They do a great job harassing individual candidates, putting them under 24/7 scrutiny with people literally following them with an iPhone or with a camera, checking that they don't, disperse cash. But they have no jurisdiction over what political parties are doing. And the electoral bond is yet another step that has enabled political parties and to maintain a total opacity of funding of public life in India. I keep telling my students, there's no lack of transparency in political funding. There is no transparency at all. It's not lacking; it's absent, right? And that's worrying me. That's worrying me greatly.
Thank you, Gilles. Please join me in. Thanks, Rahul. Thanks. Sorry, thank you.